Okay, so you probably all got an annoying message on the screen. And I'm going to hand over to James.
All right, sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. Hello, everyone. Can you hear and see the presentation? Brilliant. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for all joining us tonight, and a special thank you to Andrew for organising this and inviting us to do this presentation today. As Caroline said, I'm James and part of XR's Citizens Assembly Working Group, or CORG for short. Just to give you a bit of a background of what CORG is, we are a group of XR rebels who have come together, and the idea is to spread the word amongst XR and beyond, UK-wide, for a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. So, as we've just been discussing, there is a bit of kind of hesitation within XR and how much to get involved and what XR is doing and moving forward. And I think there is often a bit of misunderstanding with what the third demand is and what a citizens' assembly is. So hopefully by the end of this 30-minute presentation that Andrew's going to kindly take you through, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what a citizens' assembly is, and also why XR are calling for a citizens' assembly, but also to kind of build your confidence and be able to go out and talk to the wider public, friends, family, whatever it is, help us spread the word and how good citizens' assemblies are and how they can be a mechanism to take us forward and for climate and ecological justice. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew now, and Andrew's going to take you through, like I say, about 30 minutes or so of slides, and then at the end we'll have roughly about 30 minutes for questions as well. We'll do our best to answer the questions, but obviously if we can't answer them tonight, then I'll go away and speak to people that are hugely knowledgeable about citizens' assemblies. The working group's made up of some fantastic people, and we'll be able to talk you through pretty much any question you have. So like I say, if we can't answer them tonight, we'll definitely get you an answer. All right, without further ado, I'll pass on to Andrew.
Thanks a lot, James. Can you go on to the next slide, please? Great. Okay, so here are two very contrasting pictures. The one on the left is obviously the House of Commons. This was taken during a net zero debate that was held in February 2019. That was a month in which we had the hottest ever winter temperature recorded. And it was also the same month that there were climate school strikes throughout the UK. Despite that, unfortunately, only 40 MPs turned up to the debate, 40 MPs out of 650. So that clearly indicates, you know, a severe lack of interest, unfortunately, within our politicians. The other thing to notice is about the picture is, you know, the two sides are sitting apart, facing each other. They're not collaborating. They're in opposition. They're not seeking to form a common solution. It is a typical scene we see in the House of Commons where the two parties are effectively trying to score points off each other. So it's not a very constructive environment. The picture on the left is how things could work. This is a picture taken at a Citizens Assembly. So you'll see here that there are all sorts of people involved from different walks of life, all working together to find a common solution. Notice how people are sitting together in groups. It's very much a collaborative, not an oppositional approach. So we feel very strongly that this is the right way to address some of the most challenging questions facing us today around the climate and ecological crisis. Whereas the current electoral system is not really fit for purpose to address those types of problems. And we're going to talk about why that is in a minute. So we have the next slide, James. Yeah. So if we think about what some of the problems are with our existing parliamentary system, one MP is elected every 5 years. That's the standard electoral cycle. And that individual is intended to, represent everyone across a wide range of issues, even though that individual won't be an expert in the majority of those issues. Also, the UK system is first past the post. It's not even proportional representation. So it's hard to argue that it's a truly representative situation. And, some people, as a result, have become disillusioned and don't even bother to vote now, which is obviously very bad for the country. Also, the current system very much plays towards short-term decision-making. We've known about the climate emergency for over 40 years, but most politicians are only thinking as far forward as the next election, because they want to get re-elected. So they are very reluctant to think longer term than that time frame. It could be argued that our current system is not truly representative either, on the basis that many MPs come from very similar privileged backgrounds, and it's in their interest to, keep things as they are. Also, politicians will naturally align with their own party's views, and they are very subject to influence from vested interests, be they party funders or lobbyists or other vested interests. And really the result of all of these problems, all of these characteristics, is that the current system is not really geared to come up with radical ideas and radical solutions to complex problems, which unfortunately is exactly what's needed to address the climate and ecological crisis. So in short, we don't feel the current system is really what is needed. So if we think now about how a citizens' assembly works, there are essentially 6 stages. But before going into those, there's a couple of key prerequisites that need to be in place in order for a citizens' assembly to be successful. The first thing is there needs to be a viable question identified that the assembly is seeking to answer. Secondly, at the end of the assembly, well, or at least before the assembly is initiated, the government, who will be receiving the recommendations coming out of the Citizens Assembly, the government needs to commit to either implement or at least respond to the recommendations. If they don't do that, then there is little or no value in the assembly. It has to come out with recommendations which are then actioned. That's the whole point. So assuming that those two things are in place, we have a question identified, and the government has agreed to take on board the recommendations, then there's like these 6 steps. So I'll go through those quickly. So the first step is absolutely critical, is what's called sortition. And this is where a random cross-section of society is selected in order to form the Citizens Assembly. Now, the way that works, there's a couple of steps. Initially, letters are sent out to thousands of people across the UK, inviting them to say whether they would like to take part in a Citizens Assembly. Those people that say that they would like to be considered then go into a second round of selection, where the group of people that have accepted are then stratified. So what this means is they're sorted into categories that reflect such as age, gender, where they are in the country, geographical location, ethnicity, class, etc. So the aim of this is to come up with a diverse group of citizens which broadly mirrors the characteristics of the population as a whole. So we have everyday people from different walks of life, broadly representing their community. And it's from that second group that a further random selection takes place to come up with the final 100 or so people that will take part in the assembly. So it's very much like in some ways, it's like jury selection. So it's a random process to ensure that the group of people is truly representative. Another thing to be aware of is that the assembly members receive remuneration, and all expenses are paid. So this should ensure that people from all backgrounds feel able to take part, and it's not only the better off people who can afford to take time off work. So I think that's a really important aspect as well. Okay, so that's the first step. We've now created our assembly. We have the people in place. We then move on to step 2. This is what we call the learning stage. And this is where the assembly members receive training in things like critical thinking and hidden bias. And they then hear from a range of speakers, such as various experts, such as scientists, economists, and historians. They'll hear from stakeholders, such as stakeholders from the fossil fuel industry, activists, such as XR perhaps, environmental groups, etc. And also rights holders, such as farmers and young people who are going to bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change in the future. And then members of the assembly can ask questions, get things clarified, get facts checked, etc. So the point of this phase is really to brief the assembly, so everyone feels comfortable, that they understand the issues, and everyone's working from a consistent set of information. And there's an oversight body that ensures that all the presentations of information are fair and balanced, and that any groups with particular interests are identified as such. So for example, if there is someone from the fossil fuel industry, everyone knows that that's where they're coming from, and they're clearly going to have a particular bias in terms of how they present their information. So that is very transparent in terms of where these people are coming from. Step 3, there may also be submissions from the public. So people can feed in on topics that they'd like to be discussed. and that information will be collated and presented back to the Assembly. We then move into the fourth stage, which is the facilitated deliberation. So small groups of people between 8 and 12 will discuss what they've heard, how it impacts them, their community, the wider population, listen to everyone's views, and a trained facilitator will help them work through the information and work through the process to make sure that everyone's views are heard, everyone's views are respected, and no one is dominating the discussion. Step 5 is then when the Assembly works through and drafts up a recommendation and then votes on that recommendation, where a majority of members on the Assembly can all get behind a set of recommendations. And then the final step is those recommendations are then presented to the government, who then, as we said at the outset, has already agreed to respond and ideally implement them. So that, in a nutshell, is how the process works. We'll come back and talk a bit more in some of the details later. But now let's look at an example of where a citizens' assembly has already taken place and was seen to be very successful. So it's important to understand that XR are not setting a precedent here by calling for a UK citizens' assembly. They have already taken place, and the one in Ireland is a great example. So as it says, it was established by the Irish Parliament. 99 citizens were selected to take place. They discussed 5 issues over a year and a half, including whether gay marriage and abortion should be legalized. And on the abortion issue specifically, the Assembly was able to break the political deadlock around that issue, which had been present for a number of years, and helped to inform the public debate and framing of the question that was then subsequently put to a referendum. And it's really interesting to note that within the Assembly, 64% of the Assembly members were all in agreement with the recommendation from the Assembly. And during the subsequent referendum, 66% of the general public all agreed with the same recommendation. So this shows that the Assembly was actually a quite accurate reflection of the views within the country as a whole. And I think that's a very powerful demonstration of how effective assemblies can be. Here's a quote from one of the Assembly members. I'm not going to read it out. You can read through yourself. But I think the thing to emphasize is that the notion that MPs are more informed and better informed about issues than the average person is simply not true. In many instances, they may receive briefing notes, shortly before a vote. Whereas members of the Citizens Assembly will arguably have much more time than the average politician to fully understand an issue and to consider it carefully, and also to collaborate with others to come up with a solution. Go to the next slide, James. The other thing to note is that, Ireland is not the only country in which these types of deliberative democracy events are occurring. As you can see on this map, they're happening right across the globe. Now, I'm not going to pretend that each one of these is a citizens' assembly set up in exactly the way that we are describing here. Some of them are what you would refer to as people's assemblies. But the point is, these are all examples of deliberative democracy, where people come together to discuss an issue and come up with a solution that is acceptable to a wide, acceptable to the society as a whole. So I think at this point, it would be good to run a short video to see what some of these events look like in practice. I don't think there's any audio, James.
This is an experiment, a scientific sample, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, representing 47 states.
You are going to listen to other people whom you never ordinarily would encounter.
Reflecting who votes on Election Day.
Hey, how are you?
It's a 4-day in-person poll called America in One Room. Before arriving, this group took one poll on the major issues in the 2020 election. Here,
it's a great question.
They listened to candidates, to experts.
This is really your time to have your voice heard.
And break into randomly selected small groups to talk.
When's the last time you talked to a 70-year-old white Republican?
I don't think I've ever talked to a 70-year-old white Republican until now.
You know, we're being stormed at the southern border, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
The illegal immigrants that we have today, you can see it all of the time, waving their country's flags, burning the American flag.
Sure, on TV you see the ones that do all this crazy stuff, but most of them work.
Like the country, this group is deeply divided about immigration.
I feel like you should have a wall, a border wall.
And along comes ICE, deports them. How could we continue to do that? In America.
We don't want to learn your language. We don't want to follow your customs. We follow our own customs. And to me, it looks like they don't want to become Americans.
You know, Gary, your family were illegal immigrants. The American Indians, this was their country.
Yeah.
All of us came here, and we didn't learn their language. We didn't learn their customs. We said, you take ours, and you take it now. So we're all children of illegal immigrants. I don't know how we can be so choosy about the new ones.
That got to be a little heated in there.
It definitely did. But we've all respected one another and got to hear each other's opinions. And I never thought I would be able to relate to someone that was a Republican. And I have, more than once.
More than once.
Right.
I think it's been interesting to talk to Trump supporters because I don't meet many.
She's like, I don't want to be a part of this.
Seeing all of these people from all of these other walks of life, exactly how my views have changed on it, I'm not so hardcore.
And what is your advice about political discourse in this country?
You need to listen, not yell, not scream. You need to talk.
At the end,
And this is how your voice will be heard.
a closing poll to see if there's been any movement on the issues, but already visible.
Like, it's opened my mind to see that I need to listen to other people's views.
Is the recognition that there is unexpected power
I really enjoyed you being here.
in bridging the divide.
I have enjoyed this beyond measure.
Great, thanks, James. So that was filmed at an event called America in One Room. It wasn't a citizens' assembly, it was rather a deliberative poll. But I think it does give you a good insight into the power of discussion and collective intelligence. And I think it's quite inspiring to see how people come together. And I think the potential that this type of process has to change the discussion is quite profound. We have the next slide, please. So just quickly to recap what we've said about citizen assemblies. So citizens are able to think long term. They're not constrained by the electoral process. They're not worried about their careers or pleasing others to get re-elected. They can just address the issue and think as far ahead as necessary. The process can be very useful to break political deadlock. Citizens have the time to understand both sides of complex issues and come to a solution together, working through differences, coming to a consensus. Because of the sortition process, it is a real representation of society as a whole. And also the process is transparent. So every aspect, the information that is shared with the assembly members, how it's organized, presentations that are live streamed, all the information presented is available online so that it's very transparent. The assembly members get an in-depth understanding of issues. There is time to have active debate, and they're able to reach decisions based on a common set of information. So it's very objective, fact-based, and everyone's working off the same set of information. And I guess the final point is that the power of collective intelligence. So many studies have shown that the problem-solving capability of an assembly is not down to the skills of each individual, but it's much more about the diversity of the group as a whole. So where there's a range of views and different ways of thinking and reasoning, you come up with better solutions. And that's been proven, many times. Another question that comes up a lot is why is it necessary to have a UK-wide Citizens Assembly? Why can't we just have a series of regional or local assemblies? Now, that's not to say that regional or local assemblies don't have a role. They can play a very valuable role, but in order to address the climate and ecological emergency that we're facing, it is vital that this is done on a national basis, because it's only the UK government that has the resources and the money and the legislative power to address the far-reaching changes that are needed. And this will include taxation and industrial policy, health, social and educational responsibilities, etc. And crucially, it'll require the government to reach international agreements, and only the UK government can do that. It is worth noting, though, that there's a great example of a local Citizens Assembly right here in Wandsworth. So as some of you may already know, and perhaps we can talk about this in the Q&A at the end. So the Wandsworth Council has actually launched a Citizens Assembly to address the question of how to improve air quality. It was only launched this month, and I think letters are going out to potential participants. So if you live in Wandsworth, watch out, you might be receiving an invitation through the post sometime soon. The other thing just to make you aware of is that there has in fact already been a UK climate assembly, Citizens Assembly on climate. This took place in 2020. Part of it went through COVID, so had to go online. The question that they were asked to address was the one stated at the top here. So how can the UK reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050? The Assembly ran through to completion. They came up with a number of good recommendations, some of which are shown on the left. However, it wasn't really effective because for a number of reasons. One is that the question that they were set was not the right question. 2050 is just way too late based on our current understanding of the science. So the solutions that the Assembly came up with were not sufficiently urgent to address the crisis. Another limitation was that there was limited remit, so a number of key sources of emissions were not included, such as imports and freight and so on. There was very, very little publicity around it, so hardly anybody outside of the government and the participants knew that it was happening. And the most critical problem was that it was purely advisory. So there was no commitment by the government to take on board the recommendations. And as it turned out, as far as I'm aware, they were all pretty much ignored. So whilst it was a great idea, the implementation just was not effective, and it did not achieve the desired ends, unfortunately. So what would, if we are successful in getting the government to agree to a citizens' assembly, what would it look like? Well, it would need to, a very important thing to emphasize here is that XR would not be running the Citizens Assembly. It will be run by an independent organization, not by XR, not by the government. It's very, very important that this is seen to be wholly objective and XR are not behind the scenes, defining the questions or steering the process. That's absolutely crucial. So it'd be run by an independent organization. There are a number of these organizations in the country who've got experience of doing these things. It is likely that we'd need several assemblies running in parallel to address a number of related questions, because obviously the climate crisis is, a very complex question, multifaceted. So a number of questions would need to be identified and addressed by parallel assemblies. Each one we'd expect to comprise about 100 members each. Justice, fairness is obviously very, very important and central to all decisions that are made by the committee. Run over about 6 weekends. So if a Citizens Assembly was commissioned tomorrow, it is perfectly feasible that we could see recommendations coming out within the next 9 months. In terms of costs, just mention, another objection might be, well, how much is this going to cost? In France, a Citizens Assembly was held on climate, and that was at the cost of about 5.6 million euros. Now, if we think that the annual cost of the House of Lords is 100 million pounds, then I think investing 6 or 7 million in a Citizens Assembly is money well spent. So these things are not expensive; they're not prohibitively expensive to put on. And again, just to re-emphasize, it's not XR that will be calling the shots or running the Citizens Assembly. It will be an independent process. And that that is critical to its success, that it's seen to be entirely independent. Next slide, James. Now there are some differences. You may have heard discussion of people's assemblies. as well as citizens' assemblies, and they sound quite similar, and they do have similarities. So it's quite common that people get them muddled up and say citizens' assembly when they in fact mean people's assembly, or vice versa. So it's worth just quickly summarizing the differences between the two. So both are forms of what we call deliberative democracy. They both involve groups of people deliberating and discussing and coming up with recommendations. However, a key element of a citizens' assembly is that it's informed by experts, whereas that is not the case in a people's assembly, or is not necessarily the case in a people's assembly. Also, the citizens' assembly, as we said, is randomly selected through sortition, whereas a people's assembly, people will typically self-select to take part. So it is not a true cross-section of society. It is a selection of people who've said, I would like to take part. Also, duration, as we've said, citizens' assemblies will run over a period of between 10 and 30 days, whereas a people's assembly is very short and sharp, can be done on a single day. And in terms of what they're for, so citizens' assemblies are clearly about informing policy and ideally driving government policy, whereas people's assemblies can be used in all sorts of situations, to perhaps inform activist decisions in terms of like next steps for XR, for example. So they both have a role, but they're very different, and it's important not to get one confused with the other. Okay, so that's all I was going to say about Citizens Assembly. So I'll just hand back to James now to wrap up. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, there's a lot to take in there, and yeah, hopefully we've got some questions ready and raring to go for Andrew and I. So just to close up the presentation before we go to questions. Really, if this has whet your appetite to know more about citizens' assemblies, if you want to help spread the word of citizens' assemblies and you want to get involved with CORG, the Citizens Assembly Working Group, then please email the email address on the screen that you see there. If you'd like to find out more about citizens' assemblies, then there's lots of information on the XR website. And that's just gone through a bit of a revamp, and hopefully we've simplified the language to make it a bit more manageable. So yeah, if you do want to find out more, there's plenty of information there, including things like the kind of guides to a citizens' assembly put together by Extinction Rebellion, and also basic standards. So we've talked through those today, but there are kind of cheat sheets or kind of 1-2 pages of sheets giving you kind of the basic standards of a citizens' assembly, which is quite a nice thing to refer back to if you're talking to friends, family, general public, and yeah, that's a good thing to look out for, which is on the website. As Caroline also mentioned at the very start, Andrew has come from the Citizens Assembly Advocate Network. So this is a shameless plug for the network there. If you are looking to, again, learn a little bit more about citizens' assemblies, become more comfortable about talking about them, whether that be, again, in a kind of forum like this and doing presentations, or just kind of wanting to know a little bit more, there are workshops. Actually, the next one is on Thursday, and there are 2 workshops that we invite you to come along to dive deeper into what a citizens' assembly is, and also hopefully you come out with a bit more confidence to talk around the subject. And as you see, Andrew is someone who's attended those workshops and has been able to talk in a fair amount of detail about citizens' assemblies tonight. So again, thank you, Andrew, for doing the presentation tonight and inviting me along to see the group. And yeah, enough from me. Would anyone like to start the questions off? Has anyone got a burning question they'd like to start us off with? I see Pat's got a hand up, and then Lou, I'll come to you next.
Hi, thank you, and thanks very much, Andrew. That was great. I'm curious about the you know, the climate assembly, the one that was held in the UK, because I only sort of found out about that latterly. As a matter of interest, do you know if the problem with the question, you know, the net zero by 2050, was that challenged by the climate assembly itself? I'm curious because I'm assuming that the presentations on the science behind, you know, the climate emergency must have surely prompted some concerns. I don't know if you are able to answer that.
Do you want me to jump in there, Andrew?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, good spot, Pat. And yeah, that is absolutely what the Assembly fed back to. They gave their recommendations on a wide range of topics, but they noticed the emissions that came quite starkly from the evidence. So yeah, one being the time frame. So they did recommend that the question was changed for any future assemblies, and also the large emission of the not including freight and transport within the Citizens Assembly. So yes, from the evidence they saw, yeah, they saw the shortfalls in the assembly they took part in.
Thank you. Interesting in the sense that it clearly works, doesn't it? I mean, that's being presented with the science. They then were able to challenge that. It's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the way it worked was, as I understand it, the question was essentially given to the assembly to say, this is the question, you now, you know, debate it. Whereas perhaps a better way of doing it would have been to ask the assembly to define the question up front. What is the question that you would like to address? And then I suspect they would have not picked a 2050 date.
Lou, I think you had a question.
Thank you. Yes, thanks both. That's really interesting, really interesting. I'm just sort of, mine's perhaps a little bit more out there in terms of a question. Do you feel people understand what a citizens' assembly is more? Because I remember when I first came out in the streets with XR, you know, the first two demands were easy, but the third one was always very confusing, and very confusing for everyone. But do we feel it's more in common knowledge? It's more common knowledge these days? What do you reckon? I know I know it, but the average Joe on the street, what do you think?
Yeah, another good question. If I'm being frank, no, I don't think we've made enough advance in educating the wider public about citizens' assemblies. I think that we've got a long way to go in educating people about it. It's hard for me to say. I've been working with the Citizens Assembly Working Group for about 2.5 years now, so I'm kind of within that bubble. So, you know, once we're within the bubble, you kind of, you know, you're bouncing between within that echo chamber a little bit.
I'm in the bubble too.
Good. So it's interesting. I think people are maybe a little bit more receptive to the idea of a citizens' assembly. I think they've seen the rebellions out on the street, you know, thousands of people showing their concerns on the street and not really seeing any change. So when you start talking to people about a mechanism of deliberative democracy, then that is something people listen to. But I do think we do need to get out there and spread the word. So that is part of the reason why the Citizens Assembly Advocate Network was devised, because we saw that as a bit of a shortfall. And that's not only, unfortunately, the general public, within XR as well. It's quite common that, you know, as you say, the first two demands, it's easy to get your head around. The second one gets a little bit confused, sometimes even forgotten. So yeah, a lot of work's being done within the Citizens Assembly Working Group, and then next along the Advocate Network, to try and educate not only the general public but rebels as well.
Thank you.
So that's one of the reasons we were keen to do this for the Wandsworth local group, just so at least, you know, we all have a consistent understanding of what a Citizens Assembly is and how it works and why XR is calling for one. And then hopefully, you know, people on this call can then feel a little bit more comfortable in discussing with other, you know, reaching out to others, you know, who are not on this call. But I mean, I don't know, Caroline, how big the wider group is, you know, who may or may not come to meetings on a regular basis. But, you know, where we do get a chance to interact with them, if we can just bring this into conversation and just, you know, have a brief discussion about it, I think that will all help. Just like a, you know, a ripple effect.
Ben, I see your hand up. I think Sandra had her hand up previously. Do you have a question, Sandra?
Yes, I suppose. I was unaware of I vaguely heard about the UK Citizens Assembly. Who initiated it?
I mean, you can't beat yourself up for not knowing about the UK Citizens Assembly. Not many people did know about it. It was really poorly publicised, and that's one of the standards that XR are calling for. When hopefully another Citizens Assembly happens, it has to be more widely publicised. Reason being is, if it is publicised and the public know the recommendations, then there's that public pressure on the government to enact those recommendations. So yeah, it is something that we're pushing for. Sorry, I forgot your question. What was the?
I said, who initiated it? Was it
who
XR?
Initiated it? Yes.
And who paid for it? XR.
No, so it was 6 select committees. So it was government, paid for, and they commissioned it. So it wasn't XR thing. XR at the point were pushing for it, but came away from it pretty quickly, realizing that the question was way out. So yeah, they didn't continue the support and help with it.
Okay.
Ben.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the Wandsworth Citizens Assembly. So when they announced it last year, personally, I was a little bit disappointed. Well, I was pleased that they were holding a Citizens Assembly, but I was disappointed that it was only going to be held over 2 weekends, and felt like that wasn't, and you know, I knew it was on air pollution, but I didn't really feel that was long enough to tackle the subject properly and to come up with, you know, kind of any radical recommendations. So I was just wondering if, Andrew, perhaps you had any opinion on that.
I think you're on mute, Andrew.
Sorry. Yeah, that's obviously not in line with the recommendations that we would have. So as James said, I mean, XR has developed a sort of set of best practice guidelines for how to run an effective Citizens Assembly. And yeah, I mean, the number of interactive sessions, number of briefing sessions, and the duration of the process is very important. So yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't meet those criteria. Doesn't mean to say that there's no value in it. But I think if we were looking to instigate a UK-wide one, it would need to be much more rigorous.
Thanks.
Lou, you got your hand up?
I just wondered, what's the relationship with the Trust the People course? Have you come across that? Trust the People? Is that part of us? Or not quite?
I think it might be a breakaway group. I think they were potentially involved, but this was before my time, so I might be talking out of turn here. But yeah, there certainly are people that from CORG, from the Citizens Assembly Working Group, that yeah, know people from Trust the People, and yeah, they definitely are aware of them and working with them.
Right.
Ben.
Yeah, I was just a bit curious. So, Andrew, during the presentation, you said in the Irish one, I think for one of the recommendations, there was like a percentage of around 66% or something of the people within the Citizen Assemblies who voted for something. So I was just wondering, is there like what's the kind of point to which they can actually recommend something? I mean, how large does the majority need to be?
That's a really great question, and I was actually thinking myself when I was going through that. I don't actually know the answer. So, James, do you know? Is there a threshold below which it's not viewed as a consensus within the assembly?
Yeah, it varies from assembly to assembly. I think possibly you're looking at kind of on average 80% is the your top end average, and then I'm not entirely sure what the threshold would be to for it to be kind of put through as a recommendation. But if you have a look at the Climate Assembly recommendations, you'll see that vast majority had a good at least 60 to 80% backing from the assembly participants. Very good point, Pat. Yes.
Has anybody else got any more questions? I mean, James and Andrew are sort of spot on the time we suggested, or they suggested, but if anybody's got any more questions, we've got a couple of other sort of Wandsworth planning agenda items which we're just going to cover after this is finished. But I want to give everybody who wants to ask anything a chance to do it now.
Just wanted to say one thing. It would be great if Panorama took up that presentation and educated the public. That's all. I
agree, absolutely. If you do want to have a bit of an interesting watch, I'm not sure if it still is on the iPlayer, but there was a documentary about the Citizens Assembly, the Climate Assembly. And it's well put together. I think it's about an hour long. So yeah, well worth a watch if you're looking to just get a kind of a sense of how that went, and it gives you a really good overview of the participants as well, I think, and how they kind of interact with the system and how it plays out for them. So yeah, worth a look on iPlayer.
Is there a link for that, James? Do you know?
Let me see if I can find it whilst I'm here.
Pat, you got a question?
Yeah, well, it was just one comment actually, and it's thinking about the Wandsworth Citizens Assembly. So I was slightly perturbed because somewhere you were able to say, yes, I'm interested in doing this, and then they said, well, we'll take that, and you'll also be informed as to whether you're one of the people selected. And I just thought that would kind of skew it a bit, wouldn't it? In terms of wouldn't it? I mean, in a sense, if you're thinking about it, if somebody has self-selected to say, I'd like to be one of the group that you select from, they're more likely to have a vested interest, aren't they?
So my understanding is that the letters that go out inviting people to take part are sent. I mean, they're not sent to everybody, but they're sent to a random selection of the citizens.
I think that's the case, but it's also that on the website or whatever, you were able to express an interest. So I did, and then I got something back saying, thank you for your interest. Can you do these? I think on the website it also said, express an interest if you're able to do these 4 Saturdays. And then I got a letter, then I got an email just saying, we'll be, as I said in the chat, people will be selected and it'll be you'll know on the 31st. But I didn't get a letter. I responded to that on the website, I think, as I think other people did. Actually,
that's really interesting. I hadn't spotted that. So no, you're absolutely right. That then, by allowing some people to self-select, then it is not, that initial stage is not truly random.
Yeah, that's right. Curious about that.
That's right. So that's, again, that doesn't, meet the gold standard, if you like.
Yeah.
That we would be.
I absolutely agree, and but I also think it'd be interesting because I think there was one of our members in Balham, I think, was one of the people who got a random, communication, and this said yes that they'd be able to do it. So it'd be interesting to see whether he gets a shout today. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's interesting, even if the initial invitations are to a purely randomly selected group, the people who then say, yes, we would like to take part, whether that would introduce some level of bias, if you like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the chances are that anyone who is, concerned about climate would want to be involved.
But equally, you can imagine in Wandsworth, the car lobby would also see it as a way of being involved in a decision-making in what they might see or feel as a decision-making process. Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, I think that really fair concerns raised there, Pat, and I think I remember reading that it's the Sortition Foundation that are putting together the assembly, and they are well practiced and very much, I guess, the leading organisation in bringing people together for deliberative democracy. So I would have faith that they would have high standards and would be able to bring a diverse range of people together, and representative as well. Yeah.
And it is the Sortition Foundation.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
Great. That's a good sign.
Right.
What's the age range that are allowed to be in the Citizens Assembly?
I believe it's even below voting age. I think it's up to 16 and up to what's the oldest person in the UK. So it's 100. There is. I don't think there is an upper limit.
Okay.
Good.
I'm sure that would be debated though. If we did have a citizens assembly, whether anyone below 18, below the voting age, would be allowed to attend. I think that would be something that would come up, but I think that certainly that's what happened in the Scottish Climate Assembly. There was 16 and above.
Yeah, Andrew said that it was quite similar to the jury service. When the jury service is mandatory, unless you've got a really good excuse, you've got to go. But with this, I don't know in Ireland whether it was mandatory. I think there was pressure, but I think you could get out of it if you didn't want to. Is that right? Or how do you see it running in the UK?
Yeah, so there's no call for it to be mandatory. It's just important that it's a cross section of the public. So that's the main thing, that it's a diverse and representative of the UK population. So you could go right the way through the demographics of 51% women, 49% men, different
I get all of
races.
that.
Yeah. So it's going to be.
It's just that, as Pat has said, it's self-selecting. If you can say, yeah, I'll go in, or I won't go in to it, because it's committing quite a lot of weekends. Therefore, the people who are, say, more challenged financially or couldn't care less are going to opt out. Yeah, depends on the recompense, really.
Yeah,
and
so
loads
rightly
of other issues.
Yeah, there's the recompense. So yeah, no one should be out of pocket for doing the Citizens Assembly. So that's kind of number one. So you can get a wide range of people from that point of view. But also in terms of the people that don't care one way or the other, they're going to be the people that they're going to be beneficial being in the Citizens Assembly. Now, we do want obviously a cross section of the population, but if you have someone who's very much, I want fossil fuels to continue, and then here's the evidence, it should kind of level out in a sense of that you get everyone hears the same evidence, and then to get to a decision, to call it the right decision is maybe a bit presumptuous.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Or okay, well, thank you so much, James and Andrew, for doing that. I'm going to stop the recording now, and